That is the ending of Batman, the Brave and the Bold, the animated series that ran from 2008 until 2011, and I honestly think it is the best ending out of all the Batman animated shows, and I say that as a huge fan of Batman the Animated Series. However, as much as I love BTAS, there is something it doesn't have, and that's a proper ending. The story of that Batman just goes on and beyond, and it never truly ends, not like Batman, the Brave and the Bold. So what exactly makes this ending so special? Well, to answer that, we first need to understand what is Batman, the Brave and the Bold. If you asked me that question a few months ago, I would have told you that it was the popular comic book series from the 1960s and 1970s, where Batman teamed up with a different hero of the DC universe in every single chapter. And I would have been half right, because after having watched Batman the Brave and the Bold for the first time ever, I realized that it does follow the formula of the old comic book series, with Batman teaming up with another hero from the DCU in every episode, but they do it with a very interesting twist. Instead of doing the serious and down-to-earth Batman of the comics of the 1970s, this show takes us all the way back to the Batman TV show of the 1960s. Everything about this series reminded me of the old TV show, starting with the opening music, the design of the Batmobile and the Batcave, as well as the corny villains and their exaggerated deadly death traps. The series even presents these beautiful illustrations of the heroes punching the bad guys as an updated version of the old-fashioned sound effects of the 1960s. And it was because of all of these references that my first impression of The Brave and the Bold was that it was just a throwback to the 1960s Batman show, the animated version of that series, but with a lot of other heroes. Every episode is a new adventure as Batman teams up with almost every other DC hero in some of the most colorful, bizarre, and bright situations. This show actually reminded me of the Saturday morning cartoons I used to watch as a kid, with the right amount of innocent fun and exciting adventure. And just like a Saturday morning cartoon, this show was also clearly made for kids, with very young and funny characters like the teenager Blue Beetle, the silly Plastic Man, and the ridiculous Aquaman.
Outrageous!
Unfortunately, watching all of these for the first time as a grown-ass adult, I couldn't help but feel like some of the magic of the show was maybe lost on me. After watching the first handful of episodes, I was just not feeling it, and instead of thinking that the obvious reason was because I'm not the target audience of the show, I did the most adult thing I could think of, and I started blaming the other heroes. These team-ups are the heart and soul of The Brave and the Bold, and at first it was quite frustrating, because I like Batman and his world above everything and everyone else, and the show was not very interested in the Batman mythos. In fact, we had to wait 11 episodes before they finally introduced the first real Batman villains, and they were the Terrible Trio. They are not exactly the most popular Batman villains, but these are definitely the best versions of the Terrible Trio I've ever seen. And it was only thanks to this episode that I finally realized that The Brave and the Bold was not only a homage to the 1960s Batman show, it was also an excellent throwback to the Batman comics of the Silver Age. Back in the 1950s, the Batman comics entered a very weird and experimental era, as the stories became increasingly silly with outlandish plots of Batman in other planets fighting aliens, or time traveling to fight ancient monsters, or just fighting crime in Gotham, but against bizarre characters, like the Terrible Trio. Science fiction, fantasy, and comedy was the bread and butter of the Batman comics of the Silver Age, and it was really not that great. For over 15 years, DC Comics published these kind of stories, until the Batman fans got fed up with all that nonsense, forcing DC to start all over again, giving Batman a fresh makeover in the 1960s, removing and completely ignoring all of the silly weirdness, and turning Batman back to the dark and serious crime fighter he was always meant to be. And to me, that's what makes Batman, the Brave and the Bold, so interesting. This show decided to bring back the colorful Batman, who had been dead, buried, and forgotten for decades, and they put him right back in the spotlight, once again allowing this Batman into the mainstream media, this time with his own animated show. The creators of the series are the real brave and bold ones for daring to make a show about the most forgotten era of Batman. And the only reason why it works is because these creators are some of the most hardcore comic nerds you will ever come across, as only they were capable of bringing to life the most obscure Batman comics and create this love letter to one of the most forgotten chapters in the history of DC Comics. This is a series where Batman is joined by a truckload of characters from all over the history of the DC Universe, and over the course of 3 seasons they go on every possible adventure that you can imagine. From very wholesome and light-hearted episodes to some of the most introspective, serious and philosophical ones, and everything in between. The range of episodes for a superhero kids cartoon is insane, featuring every possible genre under the sun, including sci-fi, fantasy, comedy, horror, romance, drama, imaginary tales, and metafictional episodes. There are even racing episodes as well as some musical episodes with some of the best Batman songs ever. Unfortunately, I can't play any of the songs here on YouTube, but I can do it on my Patreon, where I also posted this video with the full clips instead of just pictures, so come on over to my Patreon and enjoy the full version of this video. I literally still can't get the song Drives Us Bats out of my head because of how awesome and catchy it is. However, my personal favorite song is The Ballad of Batman, a short song from Season 3 that in my opinion is the most beautiful Batman song ever made. There is no other Batman show that has given us such a variety of episodes for all kinds of fans. Unfortunately, that is a double-edged sword, because this variety of episodes also makes the show very inconsistent. You never really know what to expect. In one episode, the Doom Patrol would make one final and heroic sacrifice in one of the saddest and most tragic endings. And in the next episode, the Birds of Prey would be dancing and singing the most cheerful and suggestive song of the whole show. The Brave and the Bold is a roller coaster of emotions, and with 65 episodes that are all over the place, it's understandable that this show is maybe not for everyone. The good news is that, just like the Batman comics of the Silver Age, most episodes of the show are standalone adventures where continuity doesn't really matter. And although that sounds bad for a TV show, in this case it's actually great, because it means you can literally just watch the best episodes and then decide if you really want to watch all of it. The real question is, how do you know what are the best episodes? And the obvious answer is that you watch the whole thing and decide for yourself. But if you don't want to do that, don't worry, because I've just put together a list of what I think are the must-watch episodes of Batman, the Brave and the Bold. And without spoiling much of every episode, I have to start off with Mayhem of the Music Meister, the first and best musical episode. This is just pure fun and unadulterated entertainment. It completely sets your expectations about the series, showing us the brighter side of the DC Universe, with villains that are not always out for blood, and heroes who can also have a good time while saving the day. It's an episode that perfectly encapsulates what this show is all about. But the main reason I think this is a good starting point, besides the awesome songs, is because if you don't like this episode, then you don't really need to waste any more time, because The Brave and the Bold might just not be for you. There is no dark and gritty Batman here, only fun times, good vibes, and an ungodly amount of comic book references. As a huge fan of the Batman comics, my favorite episodes are always those that include references to the old Batman comics, like the episode Trials of the Demon, where Batman travels back in time to the 19th century and teams up with the demon Etrigan, as well as the original, World's Greatest Detective. And in order to blend in, they give Batman a better outfit for that time period, turning him into the Batman of Gotham by Gaslight. This is one of the few horror episodes with lots of darkness and supernatural enemies, which is always a nice fit for Batman. Another one of those is the episode Shadow of the Bat, where Batman is beaten by Dala, one of his oldest vampire villains from the comics, and then he becomes a vampire himself, quite similar to the Vampire Batman Elseworlds. The episode then turns into a Justice League vs Vampire Batman adventure, with some excellent interactions between the heroes, especially every scene with Eyes, who is the cutest but most naive member of the League and the funniest character of the show alongside Plastic Man.
Ooh, the circus is in town.
Unfortunately, Ice doesn't get much screen time in the show, but thankfully Plastic Man does, and my favorite episode featuring Plaz is Night of the Batman. In this episode, Batman gets hurt so bad that he's completely out of action, forcing Plastic Man, Green Arrow, Captain Marvel and Aquaman to dress up as Batman and fight crime in Gotham. And what I love about this one is the sheer amount of references, from that weird Catwoman costume from the late 1960s to Plastic Man turning himself into different versions of Batman from the TV and the comics, all the way to the ending, with many Batmen from across the multiverse. The majority of episodes where many heroes team up goes just like that, always about having super fun adventures and superhero shenanigans. But every now and then the Brave and the Bold also delivered wholesome team-ups, as well as some emotional gut punches. The Golden Age of Justice is an episode focused on the Justice Society of America and their relationship with Batman and Black Canary, showing how the old heroes are more like father figures for the new generation. It's quite a wholesome episode with a beautiful moment for Black Canary that got me all choked up. And then there's The Fall of the Blue Beetle, the episode that shows us the last adventure of the classic Blue Beetle, Ted Kord, before his ultimate sacrifice. It's a really emotional episode, and it gets even worse with the episode Menace of the Matniks, where Booster Gold and Batman travel back in time to say one last goodbye to Ted Kord, in one of the saddest moments of the show. A lot of these episodes become so emotional because of the nostalgia attached to all of them, and that's exactly how they got me with the episode The Knights of Tomorrow, one of the best episodes that explores the past, the present and the possible future of Batman, with loads of references to the different eras of Batman in the comics, from the original Batman of the Golden Age to the classic dynamic duo, the wedding between Batman and Catwoman, and all the way to the new age of Dick Grayson and Damian Wayne as Batman and Robin. And the best part about it is that the whole episode was an imaginary story written by Alfred, just like the imaginary stories he used to write in the Silver Age. The whole show is a love letter to the Silver Age of Batman, and it wouldn't be complete without Batmite, the magical imp that only creates trouble for his favorite hero. Every Batmite episode is a banger, as he becomes a meta-fictional character who is very much aware that this is all a TV show and creates some of the most interesting situations for Batman. So make sure to check out the episodes Legends of the Dark Might and Emperor Joker. Coming up next is my personal favorite episode, or rather episodes, as this is a two-part storyline from the episodes Deep Cover for Batman and Game Over for Owlman. This episode plays with the idea of a multiverse, taking Batman to an alternate universe where the heroes are the bad guys and the villains are the heroes. This is how in the first chapter we get a really interesting team-up between Batman and the classic Silver Age Red Hood. Then in the second chapter, Batman and the Joker are forced to work together against the evil Owlman, who has been impersonating Batman using the original Golden Age outfit from the comics. These two episodes are just full of nods and references, not just to the comics, but to the Batman of Tim Burton as well. And of course, I couldn't end this list without mentioning the Super Batman of Planet X. This is a great adaptation of Batman number 113, as it introduces the Batman of Zoran R. Just like in the original comic, Batman is taken to the distant planet of Zoran R, where he gets awesome superpowers. On this planet, Batman also meets Telano, the Batman of this world, who is wonderfully voiced by none other than Kevin Conroy, the definitive voice of Batman. This episode is a perfect showcase of the kind of bright adventures that the colorful Batman of the Silver Age was all about, and it's the final episode of my must-watch list. And at this point, I know that the fans of the show might be shocked, mad even, that I didn't mention the absolute greatest episode of the series.
No! It can't end this way! It can't!
And I need you all to chill, because I did not forget about Chill of the Night. This episode is the undeniable masterpiece of Batman, the Brave and the Bold. It's by far the most popular and beloved episode of the series, and I would go as far as saying that it's the best episode out of all the Batman shows ever. Period. It's really that good, but I didn't mention it until now because it's also complicated. While it is definitely an episode that everybody must watch, I also think you should only do it if you are committed to watch the whole series all the way to the end. And I say that because only after watching all of the bright and light-hearted episodes will you truly appreciate the darkest and most serious episode of the whole show. That contrast is what makes this episode stand out among all the others, but it's not the only reason why I think it's the greatest. Chill of the Night was written by Paul Dini, one of the main writers of Batman the Animated Series and, in my opinion, the best modern Batman writer. Paul Dini can truly capture the soul and the voice of Batman better than anyone else right now, so it's only logical that he was responsible for writing the best episode of Batman, The Brave and the Bold. However, Chill of the Night is not an original idea by Paul Dini. It is actually a phenomenal adaptation of two classic Batman comics from the Golden and Silver Ages of comics. The first one is a story from Batman number 47, a story where Batman finally comes face to face with Joe Chill and gets closure for the death of his parents. And the second one is from Detective Comics 235, where Batman learns that an old gangster called Moxon was behind the murder of his parents. Batman discovers this fact while watching an old video of his father during a costume party, where Thomas Wayne was dressed up like a bat. And the best part of those classic stories is that they were both written by Bill Finger, the co-creator of Batman and the main creative force of the Batman comics of the Golden and Silver Ages of comics. Chill of the Night is a great adaptation of those comics, as it brings all those ideas into one story, and combines them perfectly to create the only episode of The Brave and the Bold that shows us Batman as a dark avenger of the night, a violent and ruthless vigilante like he was in the comics of the 1970s and the 1980s. The episode is already very cathartic, with lots of action, mystery and darkness, and it gets even better, thanks to the presence of the Phantom Stranger and the Spectre, two of the most powerful cosmic forces of the DC Universe, who have a philosophical discussion about whether Batman should serve justice or vengeance. This is a wonderful idea, as they are basically arguing whether Batman will come out of this mission as the Dark Knight of the modern era, or as the Caped Crusader of the classic ages of comics. In the end, justice prevails over vengeance, because this is The Brave and the Bold after all, but not without going through an epic climax that is extremely emotional, thanks to the performance of Dietrich Bader as Batman, who is now my second favorite voice of Batman, only behind Kevin Conroy, and it's mostly thanks to this episode. Dietrich Bader himself said in an interview that recording this episode was one of the highlights of his work in the series, and I quote, "There's a moment where you cross over as an actor, where your thoughts and your character's thoughts and feelings become the same. And at that moment, where I was confronted with the Wayne's killer, I crossed over. I felt the loss, the closure, and it was a beautiful thing."
I am Bruce Wayne.
Dietrich Bader's work in this episode is intense, and it's only made better by all the other voice actors who make a cameo in this episode as well, starting with the one and only Kevin Conroy as the Phantom Stranger and Mark Hamill as the Spectre, the voices of Batman and the Joker in Batman the Animated Series. Even the voice of Two-Face in BTAS, Richard Mole, makes a cameo as the old gangster behind the murder of the Waynes. And that brings me to the flashback scenes with Thomas and Martha Wayne, beautifully voiced by Adam West and Julie Newmar, the Batman and Catwoman of the 1960s, completing this wonderful cast that brought me to tears when I realized all of the talent and all the effort that went into this episode. This episode alone makes Batman the Brave and the Bold worth watching, as it is the perfect homage to the entire history of Batman, because it was written by Paul Dini, the Batman comics writer of the 2000s, with the voices of the Batman show that defined the 90s, in a story that brings back the dark version of Batman of the 1980s and the 1970s, alongside beautiful voice cameos of the Batman of the 1960s, and all of this while adapting the Batman comics of the 1950s and 40s, written by the co-creator of Batman, Bill Finger. Chill of the Night is, without a question, a masterpiece, but the reason I didn't mention it before is because I think that this is also the biggest tragedy of this show. The Brave and the Bold is a series that brings back the bright Batman, with light-hearted adventures inspired by the Silver Age of comics and 64 episodes of crazy team-ups with the rest of the DC Universe. And yet, everyone loves the one episode with the dark, grounded, serious and loner Batman that is nothing like this show at all. Chill of the Night is the exception. the most different episode of The Brave and the Bold, and the fact that people, myself included, love it so much says a lot about Batman. Because it's clear, beyond the shadow of a bat, that the darkest, most serious version of Batman is always going to be the most effective version. Back in the 1960s, DC Comics understood this, and they simply rebooted Batman to get rid of all the bright, lighthearted and silly ideas, wiping the whole Silver Age of Batman to comic book limbo in order to bring back the dark and realistic Batman that everyone loves. That is how the colorful Batman disappeared for decades, until they finally brought him back in 2008. Thanks to The Brave and the Bold, the colorful Batman was back in action, but only 4 years later, in 2011, history would repeat itself, and The Brave and the Bold was cancelled after 3 seasons. But this time things were a little bit different, because instead of simply disappearing into oblivion like in the 1960s, The Brave and the Bold gave the colorful Batman one last chance to say goodbye in the final episode of the series. And so we are finally ready to answer the question of what makes the ending of Batman The Brave and the Bold so special. That was the whole point of this video, remember? So it's finally time to talk about Mitefall, the only other episode of the show that you must watch only after you've watched the whole series. Mitefall is a fantastic metafictional episode where Batmite gets tired of the show and goes on a quest to get it cancelled. Batmite works things out so well that in the end he gets his wish, but he disappears along with the show, which is another perfect reference to the final issue of the classic Brave and the Bold comics. When DC Comics cancelled that series in the 1980s, they presented a beautiful story that paid homage to the classic Batman of the 1940s, and in the final page of that issue, Batmite shows up to tell the creative team of the comics to start making stories about him, but all he manages is to get himself erased by the comic book artist. And the fact that they adapted this final chapter of the comics into the final episode of the show is one of the reasons I love this ending. But it's not the only one. Another big and most important reason is that the whole episode works as a commentary of how the fans look at the series, and how it has sadly run its course, bringing up the fact that everyone loves Chill of the Night, but not so much everything else. This is a series finale that is quite self-aware, that there's just no place for a bright and colorful Batman anymore. And so the episode sets out to create an emotional farewell, as Batmite constantly breaks the fourth wall and the colorful Batman breaks all of our hearts with his final goodbye. One that makes us realize that Batman is no longer traveling across time and space to fight monsters and aliens with help of his super friends. That Batman is truly gone now, and this was his final adventure. His final farewell.
Actually, Booster, I'm grateful. It gave me the chance to say goodbye.
And that's what makes this ending so damn special.
But if this is going to be the end, let's give everyone one last thing to remember.
The show as a whole might not be on the same level as the animated series or Batman Beyond when it comes to storytelling or their iconic reputation. However, The Brave and the Bold is just as timeless, the animation is fantastic, and in fact, it's the most unique out of all the Batman shows. All of them always try to find the next great dark and serious Batman, always playing with the same 50 Shades of Grey. Meanwhile, The Brave and the Bold gave us something actually different, a faithful and loving adaptation of the most underrated and forgotten era of the Batman comics. This was one final showcase of the colorful Batman in a series that doesn't want to be crowned as the definitive Batman animated show. The only thing it wants is for people to look at the Silver Age of Batman and give it a chance. And the fact that a show like this got made in the late 2000s is also a monumental achievement, considering how the modern Batman mythos is completely dominated by grounded stories, vicious villains, and so much darkness. The Batman mythos truly found its success thanks to the dark and serious tone of the modern stories, but the biggest lesson of this show is that there always needs to be a big and bright source of light in order to appreciate the darkness. And that's exactly what Batman, The Brave and the Bold is. A beautiful reminder that there was a time when the man from Gotham wore the grey and blue.